Well, we have big breaking news in the League of Ireland. We're here to preview the weekend's games. I'm Rúaidhrí O'Connor. I'm joined by Aidan Fitzmaurice. But before we do, Shelbourne and Joey O'Brien have parted company this morning. A 3-0 defeat brings his managerial reign to an end less than a year after he took over from Damien Duff, just before they go into European action. Aidan, you've just filed the story for the Irish Independent. It's a big one. I don't know if it's a shock. Certainly the timing seems to be a little bit of a surprise to a lot of people, but that result, I was in Tolka on Monday, there was a lot of anger from the stands. A lot of people thought enough was enough, fifth in the league. What do you make of the decision?
I wonder if the timing related to Europe. Last year, Shells obviously had a change forced on them when Damien Duff resigned out of the blue before they played Linfield, and Joey Bryan stepped up as number 2 temporarily and then took over for a year, as we know, just under a year. So that was a bombshell. I do wonder, whereas Shells have the advantage of being in the second round, they have a bye, so they're not in first round in Europe. They know they'll have time to assess their opponents. They play either Linfield or Namakaliu from Estonia. Again, that's a winnable tie, a chance to get into the group stages. I think they felt that whatever was wrong at Shells, they need to make the change now, instead of going into Europe with the manager where there wasn't full confidence in him and in his squad. This isn't all down to Joey Bryan. The squad have been hugely underperforming and underachieving. So timing, it does seem quite harsh. I wasn't there on Monday. You were there. You probably got a sense of the anger from Shelbourne fans. They were very unhappy with. They've been very poor at home this season. They got 1 or 2 results in the last while, but the home form has been very, very poor. And Shelbourne, with the resources they have, should be higher up the table than they are. That's
the thing, isn't it? I mean, it's been a tumultuous year and a half since they won the league under Duff, and that the scenes we saw in Derry and the next day at Tolka Park. They reached the Conference League group stages last year, so they did get some results last year and got back into Europe. But for what they're spending, the fact that they have Jamestown Analytics on board and have this model that's supposedly going to deliver value in the transfer market for them, 5th in the table and a return of 30 points from 22 games and a really risible home record is what probably has got them to this point. Yeah, and a lot of things wrong. And what struck me was sometimes talking to Joey Bryan after game, where you see the concession of goals so sloppy from set pieces, and every week asking Joey, how do you fix that? And he came back to, well, we got back to it in the training ground. On Monday we work hard. The same things kept happening again. I think other teams saw Shelbourne as very, very vulnerable. They have a decent keeper in Spiel, but the back four, they did have a huge, I think it have to mention injuries. They were missing Paddy Barrett for a huge chunk of the season. They missed Oren Casey for a lot of the season. They missed Mipo Adebeko. He was only just back in the team, scored the winner against Shamrock Rovers, and does his hamstring, could be gone again for a spell. I know he's being assessed at the moment, but so they have had injuries, but with the squad they have, they should be doing an awful lot more. And the recruitment, I think the club Shelbourne have to step back and look at that recruitment project. A lot was made of this Jamestown analytic process, the same data driven that Hearts use it, Brighton use it, lots of clubs use it. Shelbourne pay for this service. This delivered them 2 players in particular, Freitas and Lundgren, who came from within that scouting network. They're not in the team, they can't get in the team. And if you look, I was thinking about this the other day in terms of who's recruited better. Kieran Kilduff has a much lower budget. He recruited players generally from within the league, the likes of Danny Mullen, Rob Cornwall, Keith Buckley, or players from the First Division, Tehan, and players like that. They're getting far more value for money for those players than Shelbourne are for whatever fee they're paying for Jamestown Analytics. And when I see someone like Freitas, who came with a big reputation, on the bench every week or getting 5 or 10 minutes and doing his warm down at the end, having only played 5 minutes, it hasn't worked. So I think Europe now is big for Shelbourne. The finances there, they can see. They made 3 million last year. Europe is a real resource. You get 100 grand plus for winning the league. You can easily make $1 million by having a decent season in Europe. 3 million if you make the group stages. Shelbourne struggled a bit last. They did qualify. They had a very poor record in the Conference League. I'll excuse them that. It was their first time there as a club. They're learning as a club and as a team. But I think they saw that the benefit there for being in Europe, and it just felt that they needed a change. I think you'll see a change in personnel over the summer as well. I think there'll be a clear out there because there's quite a lot of what I consider players underachieving and a bit of dead wood in that squad. I think you will see a bit of a clear out. There's even talk that Harry Wood is being linked with a move to Luton, I saw during the week as well, and they can't afford to lose him because he's been their best player. But I do wonder about the team that Duff built was so together, and you had figures, League of Ireland, almost Stephen Kenny-esque signings like bringing in Mark Coyle, Conor Kearns, and bonding them all together into this really unified group that went and did something incredible. And a lot of those players have now left, and they've been recruited either from the outside or they've brought in players from the league. I haven't worked. Dean Jarvis has come back, and he was a star then, but he hasn't really made an impact this year. And they seem to have lost that togetherness and bond. And maybe what they were doing under Duff was unsustainable because it was so special. But it was a difficult task for Joey O'Brien, who was quite a reluctant manager as well.
He was, and I think, but the task for Shelbourne wasn't to win the league this year. That wasn't their target. Shamrock Rovers expected to retain it. Derry City themselves made all the noise about winning the league. Joey O'Brien's target this year was not to win the league. It was to be more competitive, to have a run in the cup, and to make progress in Europe, because that will now be a key demand. Because the finances, we know Shelbourne, they lost $1 million a year for the previous 3 years. They made $3 million last year. Losses have to be accounted for at some stage. Unless you have money men, there is some US investment behind Shelbourne, but eventually you have to look back and go, is this working? And a lot of it just didn't work. You're right. I mean, what Damien Duff did was bring players like Mark Coyle, just brought them to a new level. JJ, he turned fairly standard League of Ireland players into league winners. And you're right, something was lost when you have to change the squad. That you can't keep going. It's very rare that Shamrock Rovers have managed to do it. To do it as many times in a row. But you need to freshen up. You need to wait to do that. And I don't think Shelbourne didn't do that.
It's obviously very early in the day because it's just happened to start speculating over who they're going to bring in. But in terms of the profile of manager, if they are using this model of going outside the league for players, do they take a huge gamble and bring in someone from the outside to try and do the job? Do they look across the league at someone like, say, Kevin Doherty, a former player who's had his run-ins with Shells in recent years but is very popular and has achieved an awful lot with Drogheda? Where do you think they'll go shopping for a new manager? Because it's not like there's a massive list of candidates, certainly within the league, ready to step up.
Not within the league, no. I think Kevin Doherty would have that link, and the job he's done at Drogheda previously, where he's taken them. I think Rory Higgins is somebody who would interest him, but he's very happy at Coleraine at the moment. He's not going to leave Coleraine to come down. David Healy is a name. Again, he's not going to leave Linfield. Again, if Linfield cut back, maybe. I think they'll wait and see the CVs. I think you will see there's a lot of internationals on the go now. A lot of them have come back to Ireland to do their pro licence, the likes of Sean St Ledger. Paul McShane is somebody I think who could be well interested. I think if Glenn Whelan hadn't got the Livingston job there earlier in the summer, I think Glenn Whelan is somebody I think Shelbourne would have been all over to get Glenn Whelan. I know Richard Dunn has thought about taking a job in the league before, and it just didn't appeal to him. Someone like Richard Dunn I think would appeal. There's a bit of a family link there to Shelbourne going back to generations. Someone like him could come in, but I can't see them going out. So we don't have a tradition in the league of bringing in European coaches. They generally tend to be from within the league, ex-internationals coming back home, or British coaches. And Graham Coughlin has come back. He's done a fairly okay job at Waterford so far. Again, if Graham Coughlin was available, maybe somebody like that. But I think if they want high profile, I think you could see someone like that, maybe Paul McShane, possibly Richard Dunn, if he was interested.
Well, a lot for the Shelbourne hierarchy to ponder. Now we'll look ahead to Friday night's games, and Shells are actually playing on Saturday, so we maybe finish with them because we talked a lot of them before, because I want to talk about Pats. They're in Dailybound tomorrow night. Rovers slipped up on Monday against Derry, 1-1 draw. Pats are now, if this is the month, July is the month where they get their two back games. One is against Dundalk, one is away to Waterford. They're not easy ties, but if they pick up 6 points, they're going to be level on Rovers if they win their other games. And obviously Rovers could slip up in the meantime, but the European clubs are going to be distracted for the month of July. And while Pats would love to be in Europe, this is an opportunity for them. But it starts in Dailybound. Stephen Kenny was at Tolka Monday night to watch Bohs beat Shells 3-0. He looked pretty happy as he was leaving, posing for pictures with fans of both clubs. A couple of fairly wry remarks from Bohs fans as they walked down outside Tolka after the game, but he seemed to be enjoying the sunshine. This is a big night for them in terms of, like, they've lost the derbies to Rovers, but they have beaten Bohs at Richmond 3-1. Probably one of the most impressive performances I've seen from any team that night in Richmond. Different task going to Dailybound, where Bohs have not been brilliant. If they put Bohs away on Friday night, it's a statement, and it sets up a big July for them.
I think it's a huge night for the league overall, and a huge night for St Pat's, because if St Pat's can beat Bohs, I think that's a real statement from them. As we spoke before with the lack of consistency, they can win 2 in a row, they can't win 3 or 4 in a row. So if they can do that, and the derbies, they've competed okay against Shells and Bohs. I don't think they've scored a goal against Shamrock Rovers yet this year. That's not competing if you can't even score. Take the game to Shamrock Rovers. So I think if they can go and win, they have the advantage. Clearly, as a club, St. Pat's would prefer to be in Europe. It's stupid to say that it's a bonus to not be in Europe, but they don't have that distraction. Bows are now going to have that. They're going to go to Gibraltar to play, and then have the game refixed for Sunday. Maybe that's the free weekend, but there is that disruption as you progress in Europe. St. Pat's can have that focus. What I like about Pat's at the moment is a bit of resilience. I think the Sligo game last week, I didn't see it, but if you listen to what John Russell and the Sligo supporters said after, they really felt they deserved a draw. They'd held them, and it took 2 goals in injury time. I heard the commentary, the relief from John McDonnell and commentary on LOI TV at the goals came, but it's where the goals are coming from. Joe Redmond and Chris Forrester, they're not relying on a Gary Twigg, a Stephen Gagan, a Glenn Crowe, as in all your focus is on him, and if he doesn't fire, they've had problems with injuries up front. Mata is still coming back from fitness. Keena has struggled with injuries, but El Bouzedi has scored recently. Jamie Lennon, they're getting goals from everywhere. That to me is Pat's big advantage, that Bow sometimes, if Douglas James Taylor isn't fit or isn't firing, you wonder where the goals are going to come from. Same with Collie Whelan. If Collie Whelan's an off night, where Bow's going to get the goals? Pats have that. If you can get Chris Forrester to dig deep and to find that. So if Pats can beat Bows, I think they could go on. I'm not sure they're good enough to win the league ahead of Shamrock Rovers. Their best place to do it. I don't think anybody else is good enough to take on Shamrock Rovers at the moment, but if they lose or draw, then it's back to the old thing about Pats, that they can't go on a run. They have that advantage. They have the fixtures, see the fixture list ahead of them. They're not travelling in Europe. They need to maximise that and take that, go to Bows and win. If they can do that, I think it's going to be a much more interesting title race.
It's a huge night for Bohemians as well, who we were talking last week about the 4-1 defeat to Derry. They followed that up with a 2-1 defeat at home to Dundalk, having once again gone ahead. And I'd say walking into Tolka Park, if you surveyed most fans which manager was under more pressure going into Tolka Park on Monday night, it was Alan Reynolds. And yet, on the back of that, he sticks with Paul Walters, the American goalkeeper who came in when Kasper Haraska was away for his wedding, as we discussed last week. He keeps his first clean sheet. Harry Vaughan sets the tone with a wonder goal. Wasn't great defending from Shelbourne, but the finish from Vaughan was amazing after just 27 seconds. And really, it was as comfortable and as dominant as Bows have been all season. And they're the most Jekyll and Hyde team in the league, I think. They lurch from the sublime to the ridiculous on a weekly basis. And I think the fans talk about Rennie bingo when it comes to that team selection, but it's almost Bows bingo as to what Bows team is going to show up on a Friday night. This is another key game for them, because if they go and beat Pats, they move into second ahead of, I think they've got Drogheda, and then it's Europe. And they've played more games played than Pats, but they have the points in the bag. Pats have to go and win them. So it seems like a pivotal night for both clubs, and it's live. It's the live game on Virgin as well. I think it's going to be a really good game.
Yeah, and that's the thing about you say about Bows, which turn up, that they can be so good and some nights and so awful. They were awful in Derry. They were awful at home to Dundalk. And yet they can go and be so impressive against. You would just wonder, that consistency, where is that? Where does that come from? Does that come from leadership on the field? Is that from the dugout? Where does that come from? I think home form has been indifferent. I think sometimes when the crowd turns, the crowd did turn on Reynolds and the players at the end of the Dundalk game, because they were 1-0 up at home against a newly promoted team. Their games you win if you're serious about yourself as a club, about going on. And you look at, I was thinking a comment that Damien Duff made on TV a couple of weeks ago. He said that's why Bows haven't won the league since 2009. You see so many episodes of that St. Pat's last week, not being brilliant at home to Sligo, but getting the win. Shamrock Rovers at the moment, I think they're getting through games. They're the Derry, they're just about they have something in them to get it. Bows don't seem to have that if they're not, they're either brilliant or terrible. There's no real middle ground with Bohemians. I think supporters would like just a bit of stability and a bit more normal, but the key factor was the fact that they took the lead against Shelbourne. The 3 of the 4 previous games they'd taken the lead and dropped points. The fact that they took the lead away to Shells and won the game. A big thing would be Harry Vaughan. I mean, his contract is up. He's on loan from Hull. He's been released by Hull. He's not going back. So I think the end of June is when his contract is formally up. Bows are in talks with them. I think Europe is going to be a big factor for him. If I was Harry Vaughan's agent and people around him, I would say stay here, play in Europe. You will have offers in England. Do you really want to go to League 1, League 2, maybe Conference or Scottish Championship, maybe bottom half SPL, or do you want to play in Europe for Bohemians? And the goal he scored, if you want to do a highlights reel for Harry Vaughan, just stick on the goal he scored against Shelbourne the other day. So yeah, just a bit of consistency from Bows, and a big call to keep Walters in the team ahead of Haranchka, but it's worked so far.
They reverted to 4-4-2 or for probably 4-3-3 really on Friday, but the flat back four was the key, and Pat Hickey gave a fairly big rallying call after the Dundalk game, calling on the players to kind of up their work rate and intensity, and he was back in with Todd, and that was the kind of solidity of the start of the season. They moved to a 3, and that kind of got a bit of a mid-season bounce, but they're back to the 2, and they look much more solid. Both teams need to be on it, because Shamrock Rovers are playing Galway in an unusually early kickoff at 7:30 in Tala, I think, due to concert traffic elsewhere on the south side. Shamrock Rovers always beat Galway. This is the fixture. It's the most one-sided fixture, I think, in the history of football. It's certainly a Tala. So, do you see any way that Rovers could slip up tonight? Because they are vulnerable at the moment without Pico Lopez.
They are vulnerable. I saw them against Derry on Monday, and aside from the goal that was set up by James McLean and put into Liam Boyce, very soft goal to concede. They made 3 criminal mistakes. 3 different players, Sobowale, Lee Grace and O'Sullivan, all made key mistakes while in possession. A better team than Derry. Liam Boyce is 35-year-old who's playing his first game since August, his first start. I think if that was Galway and Stephen Walsh, the form he's in, Walsh gets a hat-trick, or Aidan Keane scores goals, or Colin Whelan, or Bemi Arubi, somebody else would have. So Rovers are making mistakes. And there does seem to be a mistake in particularly in Sobowale. He's nearly costing points before. Rovers, I was speaking to Stephen Bradley this morning, they're a bit worried about this game. You're right, the history suggests that it's a walkover. Bradley made a point that Galway have created more chances against Shamrock Rovers this season than anybody else. Haven't always got the points. Rovers won in Galway, but Galway came very close to getting a draw. Rovers just always win in Galway. It's this bizarre record. I think they've won the last 18 games or something in Galway. It's some insane stat. But a little bit of trepidation from Rovers this morning, just because, and when you have someone like Walsh in form, and again, Galway aren't relying on Piero, hasn't really kicked on since he came in, but they don't need him. They're getting goals. Tvardak has been injured the last while. Tvardak has been huge for them. If he's back fit, I think he could add to it. But Galway, I think John Caulfield would have. I saw John Caulfield was in Tal on Monday. He'd have taken an awful lot. He will see how vulnerable Shamrock Rovers are, that they can be forced into errors. Derry didn't punish those. A good, sharp Galway side with someone like Walsh or Hurley or players like that, they can punish them. So I would not assume that this is a Shamrock Rovers win. Quickly,
and we shouldn't skate over them, Dundalk, you mentioned Kieran Kilduff earlier, they're at home to Waterford. They'll be hoping for a draw on Derrymount probably, so that will bring them right in between Bows and Pats, and they're right in the mix. I mean, they're a newly promoted side. Their squad probably isn't as strong in terms of depth as the other teams, but they don't have Europe to think about. They have 2 games in hand, just like Pats. One of them is against Pats next month. What's realistic for them? I mean, Waterford at home, if they do have ambitions, and their fans are certainly starting to talk with ambition, this is a game they have to put to bed, even though Waterford have been a little bit resurgent recently.
Yeah, a couple of things about Dundalk. I think the squad, they really are stretched, and sometimes you watch a game and you wonder why is a player underperforming, and Kilduff says after he shouldn't have played, but we'd nobody else. One game, Keith Buckley, I can't remember what game it was, Buckley, I thought Buckley was quite poor. And then you speak to Kieran Kilduff after and said I had to beg him to play. He was 50% fit, but he had to play. And they're running on empty a little bit, the squad, because they've lost Leonard to the UK. They're quite low on numbers, and players are playing. You can't. Adrenaline will carry you so far. So the board now need to go to the owner of Dundalk, need to go to Kieran Kilduff and say, here's your reward for getting us this. We're in the hunt for Europe, and Kilduff can present a shopping list and say, I need 3 or 4 players. They've coped well. They've lost Conor Kearns. Minogue's come in, bit of a shaky start, but he's done really well. And if they can keep Arubi, I think Arubi is probably the most informed. I'd love watching Arubi every week. If they can keep him, there will be offers. So if Dundalk are brave enough to reject those offers and keep Arubi till the end of the season, Europe is there. But they need to start off. They need to do it. I just fear with Dundalk that the players they have, they're playing players who are 60-70% fit. You're an outlook eventually, so it's up to the board now to give Kieran Kilduff the tools, the resources to bring in more players.
Derry return to the Brandywell and their new pitch tomorrow night, and I know there's a small section of the internet who have been drooling over the pictures of this pitch all week. It looks like an unbelievable game changer for the venue, and they've set up a fan zone as well. They had their Celtic Park stint. It didn't go badly. They won a couple of games there, drew a couple of games, but this pitch and the return there should be a big lift for a Derry team that are just looking for something. I mean, Tiernan Lynch must be looking at the news that Shelbourne have sacked their manager, or sorry, that Joey O'Brien has left Shelbourne when Shells are 4 points ahead of them, quite nervously, with a game extra played or a game less played. But maybe the return to the Brandywell could be the lift that Derry need.
Lynch, interesting to hear what Lynch had to say after the Rovers game. He said, and they performed really well, and draw was probably a fair result, but given the resources they had, like Shamrock Rovers made a quadruple substitution. They've internationals on the bench. Derry brought on a 15-year-old and a 16-year-old. That's where Derry are, just missing so many players. The problem for Derry, as Lynch said, has been they can get up for the big games, beating Bows and drawn away to Shamrock Rovers. It's the so-called lesser games. I'm using that term. I'm not diminishing the likes of Galway or Drogheda or those games, but that's where they struggle. And that's something in the players' mentality that, yeah, you can get up for going to Tala. but you're poor at home to Galway or at home to Drogheda or at home to Waterford. So if they can fix that, I think Derry need work as well in the transfer market as well. It's been 4 departures. They can't rely on that. They had basically a bunch of kids on the bench at the moment. You can't finish out a season. There'll be a busy season coming up. They've European games. They've at least 4 games in Europe. You can't rely on 16-year-olds in Europe. So I think again they will need players. And again, I'm sure Lynch has his targets. But if they can switch that mentality in Derry, that these are the games you need to do it for. There's no point in you going to Tala, taking on the champions and getting a very well-deserved draw and then losing at home to Waterford.
Those are the 4 Friday night games. Saturday, Shells are in Sligo under Lorcan Fitzgerald. Sligo looking to bounce back from the disappointment of that Pat's defeat. John Russell's probably a name that could be mentioned in regards to the Shells job as well, given how well he's done at Sligo. But it'd be fascinating to see how Shells do. You know, we've talked about them a lot, but like whether it was all Joey O'Brien, whether the players will suddenly find a performance.
Yeah, you often
as sometimes
see
happens.
New manager bounce and maybe a fresh voice. Look, Fitzgerald will be in charge for this weekend unless they make a very rapid appointment on Friday. I can't really see that happening. But it's up. I think they will sit around and ask the players, where have you been for the last few months? Look at players individually. Why is our home form so poor? Why haven't we had enough clean sheets? Why have we so easy to score against? Why did we give Bohemians so many easy goals in that game? It's up to the players then that's not up to Lorcan Fitzgerald. That's up to the players and the strong group there. That's where I think you missed the likes of Coyle. I think he's been a big loss. Letting his departure. So it's up to the players to group experience there. There's players who've won leagues. There's players, Sean Gannon, a lot of experience in that Shelbourne. They need to be the talkers now in training over the next couple of days and on the bus to Sligo on Saturday to try and turn it around.
Well, loads happening in the League of Ireland once again this weekend, and you can follow it all on the Irish Independent.